The letter slipped out of the old book like it had been waiting for my hands, and the moment I saw the name at the bottom, my stomach turned warm and sour at the same time. Not because I recognized the handwriting, I didn't, because I recognized the name. Evelyn Moore. My wife. And the letter wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to someone named Luca. For a long moment I just stood there in the quiet of the hospice charity shop, holding a hardback copy of Rebecca like it might start speaking on its own. Outside, late afternoon traffic moved along the high street in that steady, indifferent way it always does. Inside, there was the soft shuffle of clothes hangers and the faint scent of old paper and lavender polish. I come in for a lamp. That was the sort of errand my life had become since Evelyn died, small, practical, meant to fill time. I was 58 and newly retired, and I told everyone I was doing fine, because it was easier than explaining how grief sometimes felt like walking through a house where someone had quietly removed all the doors. The volunteer at the till, thin woman, kind eyes, watched me stare at the open page. "Everything all right, love?" she asked. I heard myself answer with a calm I didn't feel. "Yes, I just found something." The letter was folded once, the paper thick and cream-colored. It had been pressed flat for years. There was no envelope, just the sheet tucked between chapter pages as though the book had been asked to keep a secret. At the top was a date, April 1997. That was 2 years before I met Evelyn. I unfolded it fully and read, "Luca, if I ever post this, it means I've finally stopped pretending I can carry it alone. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm writing because I'm tired of being the only person who knows what happened on Wrenfield Road." My fingers tightened on the paper. Wrenfield Road. I'd never heard Evelyn mention it. Not once. Yet the name landed in my mind with the dull certainty of a place that matters. The volunteer must have sensed something shift in me, because she lowered her voice. "Do you want to sit down a minute?" I nodded and let her guide me to a small chair near the window, by a shelf of donated books. People passed outside carrying shopping bags, heads down against a light drizzle. Ordinary life carried on regardless. I forced myself to read the rest. "You asked me once whether love makes people brave or reckless. I think it makes them honest eventually. And I have to be honest now. I was the one who made the call. I was the one who started the chain of events. I didn't mean for it to go that far, but it did, and I have lived inside that but for years. You said you would do anything for me. I believed you. That's what frightens me most. Not that you loved me, but that you loved me enough to stop thinking clearly. If you ever wonder whether I deserved what you did, the answer is no. If you ever wonder whether I would do it again, the answer is, I don't know. And that is the truth that wakes me at 3 in the morning. Evelyn." I stopped reading and stared at the words until they blurred. I should have folded it back up and put it where I found it. I should have paid for the book and walked away. I should have chosen peace. But the letter had my wife's name at the bottom. My wife who'd spent 25 years building a life with me that looked, from the outside, as uncomplicated as a clean kitchen counter. My wife who'd taught history at a secondary school, who kept biscuits in a tin for visiting nieces and nephews, who cried at documentaries about rescue dogs, who held my hand as if it was a promise. She had written about something on a road I'd never heard of, and she'd written the words, "I was the one who made the call." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The motion felt like stealing, even though the book had been given away, even though the letter was clearly never meant for the charity shop shelf. "Would you like me to keep the book behind the counter?" the volunteer asked. I shook my head. "I'll take it," I said, and heard how flat my voice sounded. At home, the house greeted me with its familiar quiet. I set the book on the kitchen table, made tea I didn't drink, and then went upstairs to the small room that had once been Evelyn's study. I hadn't changed much in there since she died. The desk still held her pen pot. A framed photograph still sat on the windowsill. Evelyn at 50, laughing with her hair blown sideways by coastal wind. I told myself I was preserving her. Perhaps I'd just been avoiding the work of acceptance. I opened the top drawer, the one where she kept papers. Lesson plans, receipts, old birthday cards. I didn't know what I was looking for until I saw it. A small address book, the kind with alphabetical tabs worn at the edges. I flipped to L. There were only 2 entries. Luca Bennett with an old mobile number, crossed out. And beneath it, written smaller, as if Evelyn hadn't wanted it to take up much space. Luca, don't call. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking under me. In all our years together, Evelyn had never mentioned anyone named Luca. Not as an old flame, not as a friend, not as a mistake. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing the letters line like a quiet bell. What happened on Wrenfield Road? Morning brought a thin pale light and the ache behind my eyes that comes from too many hours with your thoughts. I made toast I didn't eat. I stood at the sink and watched the kettle boil even though it was already hot. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the local library. Not for books. For newspapers. There was a small archive room in the back where the librarian, Mr. Patel, gentle and precise, would help you find old local reports if you knew what you were looking for. Evelyn had loved the library. She'd volunteered there after retirement, shelving returns and chatting quietly with the regulars. Mr. Patel had spoken at her memorial and said she made people feel noticed. He looked up when I entered and his face softened with recognition. Mr. Moore, he said, it's good to see you. How are you managing? Not brilliantly, I said, because the truth felt necessary now. I need your help with something. He guided me to a desk and listened while I explained, carefully, that I was searching for anything connected to Wrenfield Road, and that it likely dated back to the late 90s. He didn't ask why. Librarians, I've noticed, have a talent for letting you keep your dignity. Wrenfield Road, he repeated. That's in Harrogate District, isn't it? Not far from here. Let me see what we have. He returned with a stack of bound local papers and showed me how to use the digital index for major incidents. I typed the street name with stiff fingers. Several results came up, small things. A burst water main, a house sale, community fun run. Then one line made my breath catch. Wrenfield Road. Fire, 1 injured. Date: May 1997, 2 weeks after Evelyn's letter. I clicked. The article was small, tucked between a report about council parking and a photo of a school choir. But the words on the screen had weight. A late-night fire at a terrace property on Wrenfield Road has left 1 man hospitalized with smoke inhalation. The fire is believed to have started in the kitchen. Neighbors report hearing shouting earlier in the evening. Police say there is no suspicion of foul play at this time, though inquiries are ongoing. The occupant, 32-year-old Simon Hale, is expected to recover. Below, a single sentence. A local woman, Evelyn Hart, 29, is said to have raised the alarm. Hart, Evelyn's maiden name. My hands went cold. She hadn't only written about Wrenfield Road. She'd been named in the paper as someone who raised the alarm. She was part of the official story, small as the mention was. Mr. Patel stood behind me, reading my posture more than the screen. Would you like me to print it for you? He asked softly. Yes, I said. As the printer hummed, the word from the letter returned, sharp and undeniable. I was the one who made the call. The article said she raised the alarm. But the letter suggested she made a different kind of call, one that started a chain. I drove home with the printed article on the passenger seat like a fragile thing. My mind kept trying to reorder my marriage. The years, the holidays, the conversations, the small arguments, the nights we fell asleep with the radio murmuring. Where, among all of that, had she stored this hidden room? After lunch, if you can call a piece of fruit forced down out of obligation lunch, I searched Evelyn's study again, slower this time, the way you search when you're trying not to be cruel to the person you're investigating. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of old exam papers, I found a small tin box. Inside were photographs. Not family, not holidays, but snapshots of ordinary streets, houses, a bus stop, a corner shop, and one photo that made me sit back hard. A young Evelyn stood outside a terraced house. Beside her, a man in a leather jacket leaned on a low brick wall, looking away from the camera. On the back, in someone else's handwriting, Eve e Luca. Spring 97. So Luca was real, not a name on a page. A man, breathing, smiling faintly at something outside the frame. I stared at his profile, trying to imagine his voice, his habits, the things he said that made Evelyn trust him. And then I turned the photo over again and read the other line beneath the caption, written in Evelyn's hand. He promised he'd fix it. Fix it. The phrase made my stomach tighten, because fix it is what people say when they don't want to admit something can't be repaired. I thought of Evelyn's letter. You said you would do anything for me. I didn't want to, but I knew what I had to do next. I had to find Luca Bennett. The number in the address book was crossed out, but sometimes old numbers leave trails. I called my friend Martin, retired now from the police, someone I'd had Sunday walks with for years. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough to justify asking for a favor. I need to locate someone, I said. A Luca Bennett. It's connected to Evelyn. There was a pause on the line, the kind that suggests a man choosing to step carefully. All right, Martin said. Send me whatever details you have. I can't do anything improper, James, but I can point you in the right direction. By evening, he'd texted an address in a town 2 hours away, on the edge of the coast. Not promising it's him, he added, but it's the most likely match. Be gentle. Be gentle. It was the kind of advice you give a man holding something sharp. I drove the next morning under a sky that looked undecided. The landscape softened as I neared the sea, fields giving way to low hills and then, finally, salt air. The address was a small bungalow on a quiet street. The garden was tidy in a no-nonsense way. Gravel, 2 pots by the door, a clipped hedge. Someone lived here who liked order. I sat in the car and stared at the front door until my hands stopped trembling. Then I got out and knocked. Took a while. When the door opened, a man stood there in a gray jumper, hair thinning, face lined in a way that suggested years of careful restraint. He was around my age, maybe a little younger. His eyes were tired, but not unkind. Yes, he said. My name is James Moore, I said. I'm sorry to disturb you. I was married to Evelyn. The man didn't move, but something in his face shifted, like a door unlatched. Evelyn Hart, he said quietly, as if testing whether the name still belonged in his mouth. Yes, I said. She died last year. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were damp. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. I found a letter, I said. One she wrote to you. His jaw tightened. I told her not to, he murmured. I'm not here to accuse you, I said, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. I'm here because she wrote about something that happened on Wrenfield Road, and I need to understand. He stepped back from the doorway. Come in, he said. Inside, the bungalow was plain but warm. A kettle sat ready on the counter. A framed photo of a teenage boy, now grown, I assumed, stood beside a bowl of keys. A life lived quietly, deliberately. Luca made tea without asking, the way people do when they need their hands to be busy. When he sat opposite me, he held his mug like an anchor. You found her letter after all these years, he said. Yes, I replied. She said she made a call. She said she started a chain. The paper says she raised the alarm about a fire. A man named Simon Hale. At the name, Luca's face tightened. Simon, he said. Yes. Who was he? I asked. Luca stared into his tea as if answers might rise in the steam. He was her fiancé, he said finally. The word landed heavily. Evelyn had been engaged. She'd never told me. I didn't know, I whispered. I don't blame you, Luca said. She didn't want you to carry it. That was Evelyn. She carried things until her hands bled, and then she smiled like it was nothing. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. What happened on Wrenfield Road? Luca's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. That depends on which part you mean, he said. The official part or the real part? The real part, I said. He nodded slowly. Evelyn was 29, he began. Smart, kind. The kind of woman who makes you believe you could be better just by standing near her. Simon was charming when he wanted to be, but he liked control. The closer the wedding got, the more he tightened his grip around her life. Who she saw, where she went, what she wore. Small things until they weren't small. I sat very still. I could see Evelyn in my mind, older, calm, firm with teenagers in her classroom. I couldn't easily picture her being controlled. But perhaps that was the point. People remake themselves. She met me at a cafe, Luca continued. We talked. At first it was innocent. Then it became not innocent. I won't pretend otherwise. My chest tightened, but I kept listening. She didn't want an affair, he said. Not in the way people imagine it. It wasn't excitement. It was escape. She wanted someone to look at her like she was her own person again. He swallowed. And I loved her. The stupid, absolute kind of love that makes you think doing something drastic is the same as doing something right. I thought of Evelyn's line, "You loved me enough to stop thinking clearly." "Tell me about the fire," I said. Luca's hands clenched around his mug. "The night it happened," he said. "Simon had found out about me, or suspected. He'd been drinking. He called her names I won't repeat. He told her she was nothing without him. He told her if she left, he'd make sure she regretted it." I felt my throat tighten. "And she called you?" Luca nodded once. "She rang me from the street outside his house, shaking. She said she didn't know what to do. She said she was afraid to go back in." "And you went there?" I said. "Yes," Luca said. "I went there, like a hero in my own head." He looked up at me then, eyes raw. "James, you asked about killing for love. I never killed anyone. But there was a moment that night when I understood how someone could. Not out of hatred, out of panic, out of that sick belief that removing a person removes the problem." He took a ragged breath. "Simon opened the door. He and I argued. He shoved me. I shoved back. He laughed at me. He laughed at her." Luca stared at the table as if it held the scene like a stain. "And then," Luca said, "I saw the gas hob in the kitchen. I saw the kettle on the burner. I saw the smell of it, gas, strong. And I thought, what if I just turn it and walk away? What if the house goes up and the problem disappears?" My skin prickled. "You didn't," I said. "I didn't," he said. "But I touched the knob. I turned it a fraction, just enough to hear the hiss. And then I stopped, because I heard Evelyn behind me. I heard her say my name, my full name, in that voice she used when she meant it." He closed his eyes. She said, "Luca, don't." The room went quiet except for the faint tick of a wall clock. "So what happened?" I asked, my voice low. "I turned it off," Luca said. "I left. I told her to go to a neighbor and call the police. I thought that would be the end of it. But later that night, Simon, drunk, angry, turned it on again. Or he lit something. Or he knocked something over. I don't know the exact spark. But the kitchen caught fire." He opened his eyes. "Evelyn made the call," he said. "She did raise the alarm. She saved him. Simon lived because she couldn't let him die, no matter what he'd done to her." I felt my chest tighten painfully. "She said she started the chain," I murmured. Luca nodded. "She blamed herself for calling me," he said. "She blamed herself for bringing me into it. She blamed herself for every domino after that, even though Simon had stacked the dominoes long before." I sat back and stared at Luca, at this man who had once loved my wife in a different life. "What happened to Simon?" I asked. "He recovered," Luca said. "And he told people she was unstable. He told people she was unfaithful. He threatened her with humiliation. He said he'd destroy her career. And she, Evelyn, she chose the one thing that would end it without blood." "Which was?" I asked, already feeling I knew. "She left," Luca said. "She disappeared from that part of town. She ended the engagement. She moved. She rebuilt herself from scratch. She took a job in a different school system. She stopped being Evelyn Hart, Simon's fiancée, and became just Evelyn." He looked at me carefully. "And then she met you." The air felt thick. I thought of Evelyn's calm competence when we met at a friend's dinner party. How she asked questions that made you feel interesting. How she laughed quietly, not to fill space but because something genuinely amused her. She had already survived something. She had already learned what kind of love she would not tolerate. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, and hated how small my voice sounded. Luca didn't answer immediately. When he did, it was gentle. Because she wanted a life with you that wasn't built on her worst year, he said. Because she didn't want you to look at her and see flames. She wanted you to see home. Home. The word hit me the way her letter had hit me in the archive room. I stared at my hands. There was anger somewhere in me, but it couldn't find a clean target. Not Luca, who had been foolish but not monstrous. Not Evelyn, who had saved a man who didn't deserve saving. Not even Simon, who sounded like the sort of person life punishes eventually in quieter ways than fire ever could. My anger, I realized, was the simple grief of not being trusted with the whole truth. But another truth rose beneath it, steady and unavoidable. Evelyn had given me a good life. She hadn't tricked me into loving her. She'd chosen me after she'd learned, the hard way, what love should be. And perhaps she'd been afraid that if I knew about Luca, I'd mistake her past for a comparison. I looked up at him. Did she ever contact you again? I asked. Luca nodded once. Once, he said. Years later. A short phone call. She said she was happy. She said she'd married a man who was kind. She asked me to promise something. What? I asked. That if you ever came to me, Luca said, I'd tell you the truth without making myself the hero. He gave a small, weary smile. So I'm trying. I sat in silence, letting the story settle. The clock ticked. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled. Finally, I reached into my jacket and took out the letter I'd found. I placed it on the table between us. I think this belongs with you, I said. Luca looked at it but didn't touch it right away. She shouldn't have carried that guilt alone, he murmured. No, I agreed. She shouldn't have. After a moment, Luca slid the letter toward himself and folded it carefully, as if he were handling something fragile and overdue. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door. Outside, the air smelled of sea salt and wet pavement. At the threshold, Luca hesitated. James, he said quietly. Yes, I want you to know, he said, that she spoke of you like you were shelter, not like you were a consolation prize. Like you were the safe place she'd been trying to find since she was young. My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. On the drive home, I didn't turn on the radio. I let the road noise and my own breathing fill the car. I thought about how many lives Evelyn had lived inside her one life. The frightened woman on a pavement outside Wrenfield Road, the principled woman who called for help anyway, the steady teacher who corrected essays late into the night, the wife who fell asleep against my shoulder during Sunday films. I had wanted a simple grief, the kind you can explain to people. I loved her. She died. I miss her. But grief, like love, rarely stays simple. It brings you the hidden rooms eventually. It hands you old letters from between the pages of donated books and asks whether you can be gentle with the person you lost. That evening, I went into Evelyn's study and opened the window. The air that came in was cool and damp. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped. I sat at her desk and took out a sheet of paper. For a long time I didn't write. I just listened to the house, the small creaks, the quiet breath of it. Then I began. Evelyn, I found your letter. I was angry for about 5 minutes, and then I realized I wasn't angry at you. I was angry at the idea that you were ever afraid you couldn't be loved fully if someone saw all of you. I wish you'd told me, not because I needed to own your past, but because I would have held your hand through it the same way you held mine through mine. But I understand, I think. You wanted our love to be clean. Not spotless, just not poisoned by an old fire. You saved a man who didn't deserve saving. You did it because you couldn't bear to be the reason a life ended, even if that life had tried to end your spirit. That is who you were. That is why I loved you. If there's a question in all of this about what love makes people capable of, my answer is this. The best love doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you responsible. It makes you stop your hand before it does something you can't undo. I folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer, beside her pen pot, as if it belonged among her everyday tools. Later, I made tea properly and drank it. I ate toast with butter. Small things but real. And when I looked at the rain sliding down the kitchen window, I felt, for the first time in months, something that wasn't only absence. I felt respect. For the woman Evelyn had been before me. For the life she built with me. For the hard choices she made when she was young, and the kinder choices she made when she was older. Somewhere out there, Wrenfield Road still existed. People still walked past those terraced houses carrying shopping bags, arguing softly, unlocking doors, turning on kettles. And they had no idea what had nearly happened there one rainy night in 1997. How close a young man came to doing something unforgivable. How a young woman chose to save someone who didn't deserve it. How that one choice echoed forward into a quiet, good marriage that lasted until illness ended it. The past, I realized, doesn't stay buried because it's dramatic. It stays buried because it's tender. It asks you to handle it with care. And if you've listened all the way to the end, I'd love to have you with us again. Please consider subscribing to Ellen Bedtime Tales and share in the comments where you're watching from in the world.